Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Mental health activists. That's right, we're putting out a call out there to people out there who are interested in helping people who want to recover from things such as panic or anxiety, actually being able to function in the world just like the rest of us. Today we're going to be learning about Recovery International, which is located in Portland, Oregon, who offers a method that is peer-based, self-willing training for people with such nervous conditions. Trending now in the world of mental health recovery is more that we're going to discover as we learn to understand a nervous person who has a panic or anxiety attack, different kinds of temper, training to help them in mental health recovery, and methods used in other countries. We'll also discover signs of hope and improvement, the mental health stigma, the importance of mobilizing more mental health activists, as we were discussing earlier in the program. Joining us here on the program today is our special guest from Recovery International, Mr. Rob Winnicky. Rob, thank you for joining us back here on the program today.
Thanks for having me back, Daniel.
Now, this has really got an interesting thread as we've posted these onto YouTube, and, there's mixed emotions, but most of it's positive about how Recovery International has had quite an impact on this compared to the traditional ways that we've approached mental health. Tell us what's going on here in the world of mental health and recovery.
Well, thank you. Excuse me. Mental health recovery is a hot topic right now, and when we talk about what's happening or what's trending in the world of mental health recovery, we have a wide range of activities and practices that are being used, so I'll mention a few of those today. To me, mental health recovery is just as important to a person's nature as their skin color. So it's just as important to respect a person's mental condition as it is to respect his or her gender or color. So these aspects of what makes up a person, these are all fate appointed, which means that we in recovery, what we say about nervous or mental challenges is they are fate appointed. Nobody asked for it, and nobody is to blame for it. So blaming and shaming, which is what is the root cause of mental health stigma, is a denial of a person's right to have their own unique neurological condition without stigma or judgment. So to us, neuroequality is what's trending. It's like race, color, gender, and country of origin, except that discriminating against people because of their mental health or the perceived lack of it is the worst kind of discrimination because it affects humans all over the globe, regardless of these other factors.
Now, it's really interesting, too, because you talk about blaming and shaming, and it's interesting that people have an approach like that toward people who are in the special category, if you will, and they act like these people actually have control over what's happening in their lives, but that's not true, is it?
Well, no, a nervous person, we call ourselves nervous persons because there's so many labels out there that are stigma in themselves. But a nervous person can have a wide variety of symptoms. I lead a weekly meeting here in Portland, and I'll tell you about an exciting event later on where we've opened another weekly meeting in Portland. But when newcomers come into these meetings, they often are confused because of their symptoms, which they don't really understand, or their tempers, which they really relied on as part of their basic character. So there's two big factors right there that it helps to get yourself in front of other people, your peers, people who have suffered the same kind of conditions that you are suffering, and tell your story and have someone really listen to you in a way that is helpful. The fact is, when people have a panic or anxiety attack and they eventually come around to going to a meeting, they've already experienced suffering. They've already experienced transmission of suffering from them and to the people they're closest to. So we concentrate on finding solutions to help them spotlight their symptoms and where are they transmitting their suffering. mental health training is what it's called. It's not the only mental health aid, obviously, but training, like other disciplines, requires persistence and patience, and that's why we encourage people to come back every week. Our founder, Dr. Abraham Lowe, a neuropsychiatrist from Chicago, teaches us that changes in our brain happen when we have a desire to make it happen, but we do something and turn that into determination. And we have an intent to have a peaceful life. Everybody intends that. But when we turn it into action, this is where the flashpoint of a mental health recovery begins.
Now, it seems that when a nervous person has a panic or anxiety attack, is that it affects not only themselves, but a lot of people around them. What can you say causes that?
Well, temper comes from a number of different sources, but everyone in a family or a social group is going to experience the repercussions of that. The different kinds of temper that we recognize, there's really only two. The angry temper, which is when we're judging other people, and the fearful temper, which is when we're judging ourselves. But there is the factor of stigma, and once the blaming starts, and once people around you start to use less than accepting statements, this temper can spiral, and that's what leads a person to self-blame and panic attacks.
Now, people tend to have different kinds of temper, but it can also have similar effects, correct?
That's correct. The family situation being what it is, today we have a lot of economic pressure on us. There's this idea that global greed predominates, and people are losing their sense of belonging and meaning and hope. These are basic requirements for good mental health, both in groups and individuals. People see that societies can take opportunities to gain wealth through the spread of things like addictive drugs and other societal evils that worries them. There's a constant source of anxiety. All these societal illnesses, homelessness, gangs, AIDS, heroin addiction, they all carry their own denial and shame and discrimination, and they raise the general level of tension in society. Children say they fear for their safety more than any other aspect of their upbringing. So we need to take steps to eliminate a source of violence in our culture that is really just a mental attitude. And we'll see how that's being done in different countries, too.
Now, how does training help aid mental health recovery?
We try to do all that we can to remind people that they're just average people. They come to a meeting for the first time sometimes, or they'll call me for a 5-minute work-down call. And they are not, they often bring tempers with them that are born of a feeling that there's some kind of exceptionality. There's some kind of, as if a person is entitled to this temper that they're bringing in. So by going through a very regimented program of the steps that people go through in progressing in this program, help bring them to a clearer understanding, a clarity of their condition. Let me read just one quote from Dr. Lowe about temper. A patient, even after the patient has improved to a great extent, has nevertheless acquired the art of exposing himself or herself to the public eye. That's a difficult thing, not only for patients, but patients have gone through an extended period in which they have been hiding themselves, not literally, but they have been hiding themselves in the sense of making a secret of their suffering, of which they were ashamed. There are very few who did not hide their suffering, their symptoms, and, as they thought of it, their disgrace. And that's what we call the stigma of nervous and mental ailments.
It always seems so challenging, but, you were mentioning earlier about other countries. What are the methods they use to address the mental health needs of their citizens?
I think that's one of the most exciting things that's trending in mental health. Other countries are really getting the message that people need more help. I guess I would start with Ireland. Ireland has a tremendous culture of mental health recovery going on there. They have actually formed a Recovery Ireland entity of their own. And there'll be people, they'll be trained. I think we're planning on training up to 50 leaders by March. The Irish National Office for Suicide Prevention has done research on this. And some of the findings show that 95% of the Irish people agree that talking to a friend or family member is helpful for looking after your mental health. But the report also shows that there's a significant number of people who are socially isolated, don't have many people to count on, and don't get out and about socially very often. So these findings further underline the importance of improving attitudes to mental health across the whole population of Ireland, so that people are encouraged to not only look after their own mental health, but to look out for others too. Ireland is another story. They've been having RI meetings in Ireland since 2001. 15 or 20 people from communities attend every Saturday. And in the city of Poon, there are trained peer leaders who run 3 different groups. They're all funded by the Schizophrenic Awareness Association, or they're collaborating with them. And those groups are doing well, and they're anchoring people who are all peers and enthusiastic and proactive, because the people realize that the mental health stigma in their country is causing them suffering.
It's interesting when you bring up how they have found other ways that countries around the world are using different methods than, let's say, here in the United States. And I'm remembering the late philosopher Alan Watts, and I was reading a little, what would you call it, I guess an essay, if you will. And he was talking about mental health, and he felt that, as an observation, that we were approaching it maybe not in the most, efficient or best way, if you will. And he suggested that what he should do, or what should happen, is that they should bring an anthropologist in. Take a look at what this person's mental health condition is. An anthropologist is somebody who studies cultures around the world, and that it was only a matter of placing them in the right environment that matches up who this person was.
Right.
And I thought about that for a minute. I thought, just think about the United States itself. We seem to have this idea of one size fits all. This is the linear process to getting to where you need to be, and anything outside of that, there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And it's like, who made the rules?
Well, actually, insurers make a lot of rules, and if coming from a nonprofit group like Recovery, I can sure appreciate how vital it is to have evidence-based results to prove. So a really good example of how that's working is in Canada. This all just happened just last week. The Starbucks announced that they were going to correct an inequity in their healthcare system that prevented their young people who work for them from getting treatment that they needed at a time in their lives when it would help them the most. So under this new Starbucks plan they revealed, employees won't need a doctor's note in Canada to get experienced help. The 1 in 5 Canadians are affected by mental illness in their lifetimes, and the cost of the country is staggering. $50 billion a year in social services and healthcare services and lost productivity, plus the decreased quality of life. Canadians are traditionally solid and united in their ability to stay close to life, to stay close to the earth. So they're building on some plans that have already taken place in Britain and Australia to invest in public access for citizens to psychotherapy, and recognizing that peer counseling has a clinical value and a cost-effectiveness. So these recommendations that are taking place across the provinces are proof that a tech-delivered therapy with support, or even over the phone, but better face-to-face, can help patients with depression and anxiety, can be just as effective as face-to-face sessions with a psychiatrist, or more likely in conjunction with. But it does allow patients to manage care around their own work and school schedules and to maintain some privacy and take control of their own mental health recovery in a way that's less likely to happen with medication.
Now, earlier, Rob, you were talking about peer specialists helping out in the field of mental health recovery. How does that look? How does that work exactly?
Peer specialists, I think I would define as people who have an authoritative voice because they have worked through problems similar to what the patients are expressing. The peer specialists in recovery are people who become leaders after a number of years, apprenticing as an assistant leader or some kind of a committee worker. We have a new meeting opening in southeast Portland at Holy Cross Lutheran Church, 8705 East Burnside, because that is an area of Portland where there's a lot of people living and working in the community with a lot of pressure on them, economic pressure. So Doug, the new leader there, is a graduate of the program in Portland, and he says he feels more confident and adept using the method at home and at work, and now he wants to give RI leaders and members back some of the confidence and self-esteem he's achieved.
Now, I'm curious, what is a mental health activist, and why is it important to mobilize more of these people?
Well, if you look at some of the slogans that are being developed for mental health activists, we've talked about India, Ireland, Canada, here in Portland. It's all over the United States. And I'm training some people who are on military bases in Japan and Puerto Rico. So it's a global dynamic that's happening, and that's appropriate because our name is Recovery International. But we have a number of programs that we've designed that will systematically get people more motivated to think about how they can live a more peaceful, healthy life with good mental health. The way I do it at my meeting is I draw a stool on the board or a flip chart. And across the top of the stool, I write, your mental health recovery. And on one leg of the stool, I write, Dr. Lowe literature. The middle leg, I write, attend weekly meetings. Third leg, I write, practice the method. But you could also substitute on those three legs, RI study, RI practice, group support. Because this weekly meeting has three legs to keep the stool, your mental health recovery, stable. And if without one of those legs, the stool would fall over. So we start there. We try to help people see where there is exceptionality happening, where there are judgments happening, and all that. The seeing business is by way of training them to spotlight the real things that are going on in their life.
Yeah, it's just so amazing what's going on in in the world of mental health. But there is a particular stigma that goes along with this. Tell us more about that.
Okay, well, obviously the system we have right now likes to categorize people, likes to take a certain symptom that's predominant in a person's behavior and put a label on it. So we fight stigma. We fight that. The signs of hope and improvement in our lives are that people are willing to recognize the damage that stigmatism does to nervous persons. So overcoming stigma is one of the primary things that Recovery International strives to do. The stigma part of it is also something that we strive to fight, because mental illnesses occur in all societies, in all sections of societies, and they cause suffering and disability to people. And psychiatry has a complex and technologically forbidding language, and it keeps general health workers and general people like you and me from even contributing to the common welfare of everyday people. So we promote a common language, a relatively straightforward way to communicate to both medical and non-medical healthcare workers in the same way. But then you've got the family, and even in a close-knit family, mental illness can lead directly to stigma. It can cause people to discriminate against people they don't understand, and people who refuse to admit that they even have a problem. There's another aspect of the problem here in Oregon. We have a shortage of psychiatrists in rural areas. That's a huge problem for people who cannot get access to mental health recovery aids. So if there's never going to be enough medical professionals to alleviate this problem, and the signs are that there won't be, then we have to accept that these neglected or undiagnosed mental problems can cause disability and even death as a result of suicides. So we promote simple, relatively inexpensive methods. We know we can do a lot to improve the quality of life of people who suffer these conditions, because we see it at our weekly meetings and conferences we go to. We also give panel presentations in mental hospitals and to professionals like naturopaths. So we go out and ask a few pertinent questions of people, newcomers, people who call me for work down calls, and I'll say, do you have problems sleeping at night? Have you lost interest in your usual activities? Have you been feeling sad or unhappy? Are you feeling scared or threatened? Are you spending more money than usual on alcohol or drugs? So by simply pointing out the avenues for help with people, which we'll do at the end of our interview, you've already done a world of good towards reducing stigma, because now the nervous person has a level of trust and feels safe talking about his or her condition. That's not always true in a family.
It's so interesting to see how we're getting away from, psychologists, and the behavioral approach to this in a more holistic way with people who have, better understanding because of experience about how to approach this. And I think that makes people who, really, as you said, are in the mindset, I'd really want to change this. I'd like to have a better way of life, for instance. And it makes it just, I suppose, a lot more comfortable for people who know others out there are in some ways like themselves.
I believe that's true. I think to be a good mental health activist, you have to know other mental health activists. You have to learn a whole new way to talk to nervous people and better, even more important, listen to nervous people. Just a basic aspect of all this is that people have an underlying fear of their own symptoms. Anybody would, but but nervous people who are suffering mental health symptoms have the greatest fear of them. They want to know how to make themselves fit in better. They want to know how to take away the spotlight that's been on them from their family members. They want to get rid of self-blame and shame. Nervous people, regardless of what temper they have, also fear angry temper symptoms because they're sensitive, impressionable. They get worked up easily by these symptoms. But again, accepting that symptoms or their characteristics of them are fate appointed. This person didn't ask to behave the way they behave, or they didn't ask to be the way that they are, maybe. That eliminates a lot of the judgment right there. And by not adding danger to fear, which is very common in our society, we eliminate a lot of this shamefulness. And by teaching the newcomer how to self-endorse, an important part of what we do, teaching people how to accept compliments, especially endorsements from themselves, without the blaming. Dr. Lowe says there cannot be any self-blaming if there's self-endorsing, and the reverse is true too.
So, what sort of signs do you see of hope and improvement in the realm of mental health, especially when it comes in regards to what do you folks do?
Good question. Well, just the fact that we're on the radio here talking about temper, that's pretty unusual right there. Generally in society, people either think temper is a good thing or it's just something that comes like the wind. But Dr. Lowe is very clear about this. He says temper is the outcome of an inner arrogance, which sets itself up as a judge as to who is right and who is wrong. This arrogance is due to the sense of one's own importance and cannot be overcome unless the sense of humor is cultivated to the point where humility, plainness, and averageness take the place of this arrogance and self-importance. So to tell a nervous person they need to cultivate a sense of humor, that's a challenge right there, because they're not experts at laughing, and certainly not at laughing at themselves. A really important part of our Tuesday night meetings at St. Michael's Episcopal Church in the Hollywood neighborhood is we love to laugh, and we will laugh for anything and any reason because it brings people together, it kills temper, breaks up temperamental deadlocks between people, especially difficult people, and it just establishes a common basis for why are we here? Why is it important to fight discrimination?
It's also interesting, and I think when you bring up the ideal of arrogance, it's I think in that realm, that's something that really needs to be looked at because, you tend to see these people that are psychologists. I keep remembering, for instance, the movie Good Will Hunting.
Yes.
And here he goes through 2 or 3 different psychologists, and you can sense that kind of arrogance, like, I know more about how your mind works than you do, so don't BS me. And it's like, no, you really don't. Just because you've got an education, maybe a PhD, believe me, you're not leaps and bounds ahead of me on how all this works here. And that can be very frustrating, especially for, people who have, sons or daughters, wives, husbands, whatever the case may be, go that direction. For instance, one of the big things that we're seeing that you can call an epidemic this day and age is that of the autistic spectrum. And there was a friend of mine who was dealing with that with their own sibling, and she was talking about the frustrations of going through, okay, well, this doctor says, oh, I'm very familiar with this. There's nothing I haven't seen or blah, blah, blah. But it's going to cost you $150 an hour until I spend $5,000 of your movie working up a protocol for all this work. And not everybody, in fact, most people out there don't have that kind of money. But that's the kind of nonsense in a system that we're looking at here. And it becomes very difficult, if not almost close to impossible, for a person in that situation to have any hope that anything's even going to move in what seems to be a better direction, for the person who, they're hoping to help in the first place.
I agree. That's why I think Starbucks Canada has done something significant here by opening the door to good mental health recovery for all of their young employees. Their average age is 24. Those baristas you see in Starbucks, they're in their early 20s, and they're struggling with not only the costs of living, but their own mental illness and their own lifestyle. But chief among the Canadian recommendations is this: a province-wide online therapy system that will support people in face-to-face or over the phone with depression or anxiety, and this new system may be just as effective as face-to-face sessions. This is something that Recovery International is moving towards every day. We're finding that it's easier to reach a group of 50 or 100 people in a 2-hour phone conference than it is to try to get them all together in a conference, or to try to get to those 200 people in groups of 10 or 12 by weekly meetings. So it may be that this internet high-tech world of ours causes a lot of stress and maybe even mental illness to people who don't handle it well. But there's another positive aspect to technology as well, and if we can harness that and take advantage of this trending that we have towards neuroequality and mental health recovery being an all-absorbing principle, that's huge, and that's going to result in changes that we will see in our life.
Mm. Well, it's very encouraging, and I think it's important to note, too, that when you're doing that face-to-face one-on-one, for one, you're limited in time most of the time, and two, you're spending most of the time, at least the first many sessions, just potentially trying to get comfortable enough that you feel like you can open up without the judgment that you've had to face and the scorn that you've probably had to endure in the first place before going that direction.
That's a huge step. Just calling ourselves nervous persons and average persons, that's huge. If you can form a sentence that says, I am an average, imperfect, but worthy person, that is your secure thought for the day. You don't need to look all over the world for a secure thought. You're an average, imperfect, worthy person. That's all you need to know.
Or here's another more encouraging thought, too, when you think of the word extraordinary. Well, I'm extraordinary. And I go back to, I think it was Dr. Bernie Siegel, who I usually attribute this quote to, and he says, just think about this. In billions of years of evolution, nobody can screw up quite like you can.
It's taken a lot of practice. I'm also a big fan of Alan Watts. I have a lot of his recordings, and I always enjoyed him when he would say, well, what is the one big question? What would be the one question you'd ask God if you got an interview and you were told you could ask one question? And Alan Watts will just sit on that silence for a minute, and then he'll say, well, you should ask, Lord, what should I ask?
There you go. Now, Rob, for our listeners out there, where can they go to find out more about Recovery International?
Yes, please start at the recoveryinternational.org website, because the resources on that website are tremendous. I also have my own blog site. It's called Self-Help Tools, all one word, selfhelptools.org. And on those websites, you'll find resources such as phone meetings you can attend, how to get to weekly meetings, how to watch interviews and videos of weekly meetings. But if you need help, The best place to call is my phone, 503-810-2789. Or if you're in Portland, you can call our new leader, Doug, at 503-284-6865.
And then, of course, the website is recoveryinternational.org, correct?
That's true. Thank you.
Very good. Rob, thank you again for joining us back here on the Beyond 50 radio program and letting people know that there are very encouraging signs on the horizon on how we can all just connect together, not by a lot of training, but by a lot of experience, and share that experience with others to help them realize, there's a lot of hope out there if you really have the desire to turn your life into a direction that's good for you. There are a lot of people that would like to see you be able to accomplish that because they've been through the very same thing.
Asking for help is the first step.
Very good. Rob, thank you again for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in, and you can discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you, subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, stay up to date on what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as upcoming programs. You can also follow us on Facebook as well as Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.